Placing text on images doesn't sound at all complicated. However, making your compositions engaging while keeping the text legible can easily get challenging. In this video, I'm going to show you 5 creative compositional techniques in Photoshop, which you can use for posters, brochures, magazines, websites, packaging, and pretty much everything else. Now, the image that I'm going to use for this example is from Unsplash, and the link is in the description below. You can download it and work along with me. Also, if you want to use the same font, it's called DIN Condensed, which is also in the description below if you want to download it and work with it. Now, we will cover a lot in this video, and I will try to be as quick as possible without leaving out any important steps. Essentially, I am going to try to teach you ways of putting text on photos in an effective and engaging way. So let's get started straight away. First thing I would normally do with a photo is to get rid of anything unnecessary, so a detail that is not that relevant or important and can be distracting. Like this pole here in the foreground, I think should be removed. So for this, I'm going to create a new layer. And on this new layer, I'm going to use the Spot Healing Brush tool with the option Sample All Layers enabled. This means that when I'm painting over on this empty layer, it will still be able to sample the layers behind it or above it. So that's already done. And then I am going to also probably remove this detail here in the background. This is not that nice, this tower. So I'm going to remove that. And then maybe even these can be removed. Let's just see how it looks without them. I think that looks a little bit better. All right, maybe just refine the waves here slightly. I can see before and after, so that's definitely better. I'm just going to rename this layer Retouch. All right, so let's not waste any more time. Let's get started with working with the text. So to keep everything simpler, I'm not going to worry too much about deciding what font to use and especially not looking for font pairings. This is something that I would normally do, but in this case, we will just concentrate on the actual placement of the text on the page. The first technique I would call container, and all we are going to do is to use the rectangle tool, and I'm going to set it first up with just a simple stroke. So white stroke, 18 pixels for now, and set to shape. When I'm drawing with it, it's going to create a shape layer. So if I just draw this shape around the text, this already works quite nicely, a very minimal look. Now, the good thing about using vector shapes is that you can always go back and increase the stroke value. You can just drag on the word stroke and increase it, decrease it. So you can decide what works best with the composition. And you might feel like it's still not giving enough contrast on the text. So you would like to maybe add some fill color on it as well, which is easy. All you have to do is make sure you put the rectangle underneath the text, and then you choose a fill color, whichever you think works best. Now, when you do this, of course, you are losing details from the background. Luckily, with this example, in the center, there's not much going on. Of course, you can also move it around on the page and you can decide where it works best. But for now, I'm just going to keep it here in the center and show you that you can reduce the opacity of the fill color independently from the stroke simply by reducing the fill opacity. So by doing that, you can see that the stroke is still fully visible and we just see through the fill color. Now, you can also use blend modes, but some of these will hide the stroke once again, depending in which category you are in. For example, overlay is a nice one. Even with full 100% fill opacity, we can still see the stroke. But the legibility is again not that great because we don't have enough contrast between the text and the background. So I would say for this technique, it works quite nicely just to have a see-through transparent rectangle with only a stroke around it. But what we can do is to also add some embellish or detail, maybe some triangles on the corners. Now to do this, I'm going to go to the shape tools and select polygon tool, set the sides to 3 here on the top. Just simply start drawing, and you can hold down the shift key if you want to align it to this angle. Then set up the colors for it that you need. I'm going to remove the stroke and add a white fill on it. And then using the move tool, I'm just gonna move it in here. Using the free transform and holding down the shift key, I will rotate 15 degrees on it, so I get a 45-degree angle here. And then using the shortcut Command Option G or Control Alt G on PC will create a clipping mask. So this will be clipped onto the shape. But notice that what happens is that because we have the shape's fill color set to 0%, we are actually not seeing anything. The way we can fix this is by double clicking on the shape layer to get to layer styles and simply turn off blend clip layers as group. And there you go. Now we can see the triangle. So we can select the layer, hold down the Alt or Option key to duplicate it. I'm just going to move it here on the right side. And I have a custom shortcut to flip things horizontally. That's F4 for me. But you can find this feature under Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. And if you want to customize a shortcut for it, you can go into this feature here. All right, so now we have these two corners, and if I wanted to, I could duplicate them again, both of them, and this time I'm going to flip them vertically, which again I have another custom shortcut for, and that is for me Command or Control F4. Now the good thing about having these as separate shapes is that I can always make them smaller, just select all of them, move them up here as well, and keep it very tidy and subtle. But now let's move on to an even more minimalist look without a frame. Now for this version, I'm going to make the text slightly bigger. Holding down Alt or Option key, you can increase the size of anything while using free transform from the center point. And then I want to increase a bit the contrast. Now to achieve this, we could change the color of the text, which for example, we could sample any color from the image, maybe some dark color from the foreground. With using the brush tool or eyedropper, I can select the color, and then with Alt or Option backspace, I can apply that on the text. Let's test another color, maybe from the sea that is too bright and similar to the sky. Maybe this one here, and so on and so forth. And this is a good technique, but I would like to keep my text white in this case. So how can I fix this without adding a container or shape behind the text? Well, what we can do is to add the dreaded drop shadow effect, but we will be using it very differently from the default settings. So if we double click on the shape layer and click on drop shadow, make sure you click on the word, not just the little tick. That way you can see also the settings. So the default settings will be too intense and we need to reduce them a lot. First of all, I would normally change the color of the drop shadow. Instead of using black, I would use a color from the image. Something like this, I think, will work quite nicely. And then we click OK. We reduce the opacity, make it much more subtle, and we can also reduce the size and spread. So normally what I like to do is once I have the settings, I will turn the drop shadow on and off to see what was before and after. Or you can use the preview here on the right if you have multiple effects applied. Now I'm happy with this, so I'm going to click OK. And what we can also do if the contrast is still not enough, to add a layer underneath the text layer, you can use Command or Control and click on the little plus icon that will put the layer underneath your current layer. And then using the brush tool, I'm going to sample a color from here on the sky, maybe something like that. And then I will increase the brush size, make it much softer. This I'm doing with Control, Option, click and drag, or Control, Alt, right click and drag on PC. And I will set the opacity down to, let's say, 10%, so very low. I just press 1 on the keyboard and that changes the opacity. So if I now start painting behind the text, you can see I'm changing the color slightly in the background, but it's almost impossible to notice this happening because it's very similar to the original colors. But still, if I turn it on and off, you can see that subtle change makes a difference in terms of legibility. So once again, without and with, and also without the drop shadow and with the drop shadow. Now, since we have contrast, we can start playing around with colors. And normally what I would do is to emphasize or highlight the most important word in the composition. And that in this case would be beach for sure. So I select that and I'm going to change the color to probably something bright, yellow, and also a little bit reduced in intensity or saturation. Yeah, something like this. So if I click OK, again, we can see before and after. I'm just going to undo and redo this last step. So you can see that you don't actually need any additional details. The text can hold itself on its own with a little emphasis on the word beach and a few little improvements for legibility behind it. So just like with everything in design, less is more, and that's a rule that you should always follow. So don't add unnecessary details just for the sake of it. I think Coco Chanel's advice works for graphic design as well. She said that always take off the last accessory you put on. That's the same thing here. Take off the last effect that you applied or the last element that you added to your design. And it's going to make it look much more professional straight away. And since we are talking about professionalism, one thing you should never forget, especially for all capital text or text which has only capital letters in it, is kerning. And that's specifically important for titles. So if I zoom a little bit closer, I'll show you what I mean. Clicking between the letters, I am going to reduce the distance between some and increase the distance between others. Like here between B and E, there's too big of a gap compared to E and A. So what we can do is to click between E and A and hold down Option or Alt key and then left and right arrows to increase the space there and maybe reduce the space here. That's already better, and we could refine this a bit more. Maybe here between the O and the P, we can reduce it. 1 and 0 as well, we can reduce it. In general, what I would make sure is that I'm not messing up the edge, so the H and the S should align. But I'm not going to waste more time on this. I will just show you very quickly before kerning and after kerning. Once you have everything in place and you know exactly which font you are using, and then this should be one of the last refinement steps. Now let's move on to a more exciting composition with the text. Now for this particular example, I'm going to change the font because we will need a much bolder font. And the condensed text is very narrow and very thin, so it won't work well for this composition. I'm going to use Heavitas. Again, for this, the link is in the description below if you would like to use the same font. And I will break up my text a bit. I will probably have top 10 beach destinations, and destinations I will make smaller. By the way, you can use again the scroll technique here on the top to increase, decrease the size of the selected text, or Command Control Shift greater than, less than size is what you can use. But you can't be as accurate as dragging this value up and down here. Now, if you want to be a purist, you can also just type it in, let's say 210 points. And that way you avoid the little fraction numbers on the top, which some designers might point out being a typographic sin. But I am going to also reduce the leading, select this text, and then Alt or Option up and down arrows. I will move it closer. Yeah, something like that. And then let's make this much bigger. Using the free transform tool, I'm holding down the Alt or Option key, dragging it out, and I actually want to have this going all the way to the edge and move it down as well somewhere around here. Now, one other thing that can help this technique is if you reduce the tracking. That's essentially like kerning, but applied on the whole text. So I will select all with Command or Control A, and then Alt or Option left arrow to reduce the tracking. Now, some of the text might get too close, and again, we might need to do a little bit of extra kerning here and there, but that's just, again, a quick refinement. All right, and then finally, I'm just going to reduce the leading even more, so I don't want to have too much space between the text. Something like this, and then position it somewhere around here. Now what we are going to do is to clip the image onto the text. This time the text will become the container for the image, and the way you do this is by duplicating the background layer. So select it and then Command or Control J, duplicate, drag it above the text layer, and then use Command Option G or Control Alt G, and that creates the clipping mask. But first, you won't see anything changing, because what you also need is a shape layer or fill layer under everything, and that is from the adjustments, solid color, and let's just choose white. Now what happened is that we now see the image through the text, and on its own it's not that great, but what can make it more interesting is if we also add another shape here in this composition. So I'm going to use the rectangle tool and just simply draw a shape here underneath destinations. So something like that. But just so you can see where this shape is, I'm going to set it to a different color. Now, if I want the image to be clipped onto the text and the shape layer, I can put them two into a group. So select these two layers and then Command or Control G to create a group, and then drag the image that we clipped onto the text above the group and do the same technique as before. Either Alt or Option click underneath it to create the clipping, or again, you can use the shortcut Command Option G or Control Alt G. And in this case, the whole group and its entire contents will become the clipping mask. So extremely useful technique, because now wherever I move both the text and the shape inside it is going to reveal details from the image. So I could even have an additional shape here above the text by just duplicating that shape layer, and I could also show more details here from the top of the image. So from this point on, it's completely up to your creativity and whatever you want to achieve in the image. Maybe you want to see a little bit more details of the building here in the middle, so you can move the text up a bit, and then you can increase the size of this shape layer, and so on and so forth. Now you might notice that the details that we retouched in the beginning are back, and that is because we just duplicated the background layer but not the retouch layer, which I kept separately to keep things non-destructive. But to fix this, I just have to duplicate that, put it on top of that background duplicate, and also clip it onto the same group. So you can have multiple layers clipped onto a whole group of layers. So this is something I've seen a lot of people miss out on, that clipping is not just about having one layer clipped onto another, but you can have multiple layers clipped onto, again, multiple layers by putting them into a group. Before we continue, I just wanted to let you know about our creative membership program. For a small monthly fee, you get access to over 200 hours of Adobe certified online training courses. Master all the tools and skills needed to become a professional graphic designer or illustrator. As a pro member, you will get mentoring from me and my team, access to webinars, student forum, and creative briefs to help you build an outstanding portfolio. Pro members can also download the project files for all of our YouTube tutorials. Sign up at yesimadesigner.com/memberships and start your free trial today. And now let's head back to the tutorial. This time we are going to make a bit more dynamic look by using diagonals. And the way you do this is simply by using the free transform tool again on the text layer, but holding down Command or Control and dragging one of the side points. And you can also hold down the Shift key just to make sure you are not stretching the text while doing this. You can decide which direction you prefer. I'm just going to go up, something like that. 15 degrees is a quite good angle. And then I will press Enter to accept the changes. Next, I'm going to select my text and make it slightly smaller, the top 10 beach. And I'm going to add some space here, so move it to the side. Destinations, yeah, something like that. Let's drag this down. And now I'm going to add two shape layers using the rectangle tool. Let's just draw one here, and then I will draw another one. One of this I will set to white fill. The other one can be black. And then let's put these underneath the text. And then also we have to make sure that the text will be legible. So whichever is going to be on white should be set to black. I'm using Alt or Option backspace while having the text selected because that was my foreground color. It's going to turn it into black. Now let's select these rectangles using free transform tool again, and then the same exact technique, Command or Control Shift drag up until we reach 15 degrees. So there's that skew, perfect. And now we just have to align them to the text. And this is where you might run into trouble, because once you start working with diagonals, what can be a little bit tricky is to keep that angle consistent. So for example, if I want to align this white shape closer to the text, I could use the free transform tool, but once I start stretching it, you'll see that it changes its angle. So instead, what you need to do is to use the direct selection tool, with which you can select individual points. That's the white arrow from the toolbar. So you can click on this corner and then shift click on the other corner. And once you start moving it around, you can keep it much closer to the original angle. Now, if this is not accurate enough for you, there's an even better technique. So I'm going to go back to the original version of these shapes. And before doing the skew, I'm going to set them up as smart objects individually. So I'm going to select one of them, right click, and then choose Convert to Smart Object. I'll do the same on the other one. And now, if we use Free Transform and do the same technique, use 15 degrees as before. If now I need to change the width of them, instead of doing the free transform directly here in the composition, I would double click on the thumbnail, and inside the smart object, I can zoom out, use the crop tool that's C on the keyboard, and drag it out in whichever direction you want to increase it. Then use free transform on the shape, drag it out as well. It doesn't even matter if it goes beyond the edges of the canvas. Once you fill up the canvas, just save this document. So go to File, Save, and when you close this window, you get back to your original shape, and you can see that it kept its 15 degrees angle, but now it became bigger. So you can set it up to wherever you wanted it in the first place. Now, just to speed things up a bit, you can see I just refined a little bit the shapes and made sure that there is an overlap between them. That makes it look even more interesting and more dynamic, or adding a bit more depth. And since we are talking about depth, I am going to create a last version where I'm going to integrate the text into the background. The technique that we are going to do now is based on masking our details that we will put on top or in front of the text. So what we will need is again a duplicate of the background layer, Command or Control J to duplicate it. And let's not forget this time the retouch layer. So maybe let's select both of them together, then Command or Control J to duplicate, and then Command or Control E to merge them together. Now let's move this above the text layer, and then we will make a selection using the Magic Wand tool. And let's just zoom closer to the detail here. Now, for this to work, you have to make sure you uncheck or turn off the contiguous option, with which you can click on a color, and that will select all the similar colors in the composition, even if they are not connected to each other. So you can see now we have all of the birds selected and all of these dark brown details. Maybe I'm going to shift click one more time here just to add a little bit more details. And I think that looks quite nice already. I will also shift click on this detail here on the left. And now I think we have everything what we needed. So we can turn this into a mask. By clicking on the little Japanese flag here at the bottom, this is going to show only those selected details on this layer which was placed on top of the text. And this way we created this quite nice integration. So now the text feels like it's almost part of the image. And it's a very common technique that you will probably notice on lots of posters. It's very effective. Once again, just like with everything, you have to make sure that your text is still legible, and that you can do by making sure you position it right. So for example, if I move it all the way down here, the word destination is hard to read, but if I align it to something like this, and I intentionally use these details in the building to reinforce the shape of the letters. Now you don't have to rely solely on the Magic Wand. You can also go back to the mask, select that little black and white rectangle, and just use the brush tool and go over some details. Like here on the left, I can paint over this detail with white. If black is your foreground color, just press X on the keyboard to switch to white. And then with a hard edge brush this time, I'm going to just show the mountain detail here. And pressing X on the keyboard, I can very easily switch back and forth between black and white and create a fairly realistic outline there. There you go. Once again, that's a very subtle difference, but still adds to the depth that we are creating with this composition. So there you go. Once again, with layer comps, I can show you very quickly the 5 different versions that we created. So first the container, then the minimalist look, then the clipping mask, then the dynamic composition with diagonals, and then last but not least, the integrated text creating more depth. I hope you found this tutorial useful. Please let me know in the comment sections below which one was your favorite technique. And also, if you want to share other cool ways of using these assets, download them, the font and the image. And then when you are sharing it, make sure you tag us with hashtag #YesI'mADesigner so we can feature your work on all of our platforms. Thanks a lot for watching. Like and share this video if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever we release new videos. Click on the link on my right and start your membership today to get access to over 200 hours of training courses and personal mentoring by me and my team of creative professionals. Have fun learning, guys, and I will see you in the next one.